Record? Yes. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Okay, so we have reached the 8th lecture of this course of learning how to learn in the modern day study of Zarnuji's book, The Instruction of the Student, Ta'lim al-Muta'allim, and we'll be covering the last two chapters today, the chapter 12 and chapter 13, and perhaps we can discuss a couple of ideas. I don't know if you have the paper from last time. You do? Okay. If possible, we can do that. We can also have some time for answers and questions. I have spoken with the people here at Al-Mudiafa, in particular Sheikh Amr Yusri, and I've asked them if we should have like a time for like a mini celebration for the whole thing. Okay, and he told me that we'd rather have it as a separate day, not for today, but a separate day that you guys come, we can hand in certificates and so forth. And the way we'll do certificates so far, we had people coming for most of the course and people coming for almost half of the course. And what I will do is, but I did not finalize the type or the name of the certificate for both groups. So, for example, if you attended 75 or more out of the time, then you will get a certificate perhaps of completion or something of that sort. If you attended for about 50 but below 75 or 70, well, I mean, this is not finalized, but I'm just discussing the idea with you guys. It will be like a certificate of participation or something of that sort. So we'll see how it goes. I'll just make sure that everybody is getting credit for whatever they have done. So even if you came for a lecture or two, we can find out how we can work that out, that you're just receiving credit for the effort that you have done. Okay? But at the same time, there is incentive for those who have attended most of the lectures or something of that sort. Okay? All right. Very well then. When did you start attending? Which lecture?
The second one.
The second one? Okay. So you're happy? You must be lucky, because you're happy. Okay. Okay, so this is that, the logistics. So basically it'll be, most likely it will be the same day, a Saturday, at the same time, 6:37, around that time. But of course it will be much shorter, because it will be like from an hour or so. If we can do it in less time, we'll do it. What else? We can take pictures, things like that. If you have, we can then, if we reached an agreement, or after discussion also with the people, with the hosts here about a new topic. So we'll then announce it then, inshallah. Okay.
So it's not sure that we are going to have another course or something?
It's not sure regarding the time and the topic. But most likely the place is here, most likely. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. But I have received implications that they're interested that we do things in the future after this one. But again, the timing, because here they do seasonal work also because of the university, well, also university students here will have exams. So I mean, they might do, certain arrangements with time. So we'll see how it goes. Okay. Okay. You were saying something? Okay. Okay. So today we'll cover the chapter 12 and chapter 13. In chapter 12, he's talking about memory. And what's really interesting, the title of the chapter itself. He says, chapter 12, what creates memory and what brings about forgetfulness. Okay. So he's very explicit about the making of memory. And this is very similar to what is mentioned now in the West, how to develop your memory, how to build memories. So and of course this is a translation. When we say what creates memory, Imam al-Zarnuji did not speak modern English, did not speak any English. Okay, so the Arabic, you'd find it as فصل فيما يورث الحفظ. يورث. Okay, so basically do things that brings out or results in memory. So it's the same meaning of creation, development, building, and so on. So this is very interesting when we like to compare the different views from the East and West about what memory is. Okay? So he sees memory as something that is built up. Alright? Before we talk about Imam al-Zarnuji, and there's this metaphor that some students here have heard it from me over and over again, but I'll repeat it one more time. So I guess this is something if you're asking what to write in the Cornell note-taking system. So, and I mentioned if the teacher is repeating something more than once, then most likely he's trying to stress the importance of it. Or maybe this is the only example that he knows for something, or that it works. Okay, when we take a look at a computer or a laptop, we have a hardware and we have a software, right? And we have in the hardware and I guess most of you are familiar with these technical jargon. There is a difference between the hard disk or the drive and the memory, the RAM, right? When you save something, you save it in the memory, in the RAM. No, you save it in the drive, right? In the hard disk. So, but yet you call the RAM memory. Okay. So out of this notion, we have three types of memory as humans. We have working memory, which is very similar, or the RAM in a computer is very similar to the working memory. And then we have a short-term memory and a long-term memory. Working memory. Okay? So a working memory is when you are doing things on a laptop. Let's imagine that there is no working memory. There's no memory in a laptop. There's no RAM. When you would type stuff in Microsoft Word, first of all, you would not be able to open up something like a Word application if there is no RAM. But let's just imagine, for the sake of the example, that you were able to open a software like Word and you're typing, but there's no memory, there's no RAM. What would happen is when every single time you type a word, a letter, it will be erased. It does not stay for the current function. You understand? So the working memory in our minds or in our brains is what facilitates short and long-term memory. You understand? So it's basically that every second that you're going through, you're retaining what's currently happening. You understand? So if you don't have working memory, every single time you say a word, you don't remember the word before it. You don't remember what happened in the instant just before it. Alright? Things would be instant and spontaneous forever. But working memory is what keeps the flow going. You understand? Okay? So, in this regard, it facilitates what stays in the short term or long term. Okay? You decide whether you save the file or not. Okay? And just like as the computer crashes or something, and then you have to restart it if you're doing something, then you have a word recovery. It would recover the document. So that's kind of short term. But when you repeat that more than once, at some point, the word software or application would not retrieve the information that was being processed through it. So it would not stay for the long term. You would not be able to save it unless you click on save or Control S or something. Alright? Okay. So again, the human mind or the human brain has a working memory and has a short-term memory and a long-term memory. Alright? So just keep that framework in your mind as we go through this chapter, through the dimensions of this chapter. Okay? he mentioned in the very beginning that what creates memory is industriousness that we talked about before, which again, he is connecting between memory and character and personal traits. Okay? How does industriousness, how is it being that you're that you have perseverance, or you're persevering in something, and you're serious about what you're studying, and you're taking things in a concrete and systematic ways? How does operating in such efficient way helps the memory? Then we have to retrieve or bring back the example that we have been talking about of the computer or the laptop. Some people, they use their laptop in a certain, let's say, random, not caring for the machine that they're using, right? So you find it always opening lots of softwares together, which is multitasking in the case of ourselves, always opening applications, trying to do more than a thing at once. Sometimes just, closing laptop without, closing the applications or whatever, just, shutting it down physically, not actually doing that, the turn off, or you hibernate or put it on sleep. No, you just physically turn it off. So basically, the person sometimes is acting careless towards the machine. What happens? The lifetime of the machine that you're buying would not stay for long. You'd find yourself that you need to, take it for maintenance or repair or fixing. You're taking, or adding additional RAM because you have already exhausted whatever is there, or it cannot handle your usage. Okay. So basically, what happens is that the way you use the machine affects the lifetime, affects its functions, affects its operations. Same thing, the way you use yourself, the way you operate, the way you function, the way you pay attention to how you live, basically affects the memory as well. If you're always saving files, you're always downloading things. This file seems interesting. I'll just download it and look into it. This book, I'll download it and read it after 2 years. Download. This game, I might play it at some point. Download it. This movie, I don't have the time to watch it, but I'll download it. We keep downloading things, pictures and files and books and pamphlets and brochures and forms and so forth. And things get crazy all over the laptop, right?
The internet connection doesn't help us.
Okay. I'm sorry for the... Okay. So, regardless of that internet thing, because I can see how difficult that is. But anyways, basically, when you treat the laptop or the machine that you have in that way, you would require to get, after a while, you would need to get some kind of external drive. You'd start, saving some things on flash memories, right? Why? Because there's no space. You've been saving a lot. And at the same time, even though you saved a lot, you cannot retrieve. If you're looking for something, you cannot find it. One of the reasons is because you save the download, when you're downloading, you save the file according to what it's named on the website, not what you name it. Sometimes they name the files in numbers. So when you do the search, you're sure, you're definite that you downloaded the file, but you cannot find it. I'm saying this because I went through. I guess you can tell, right? So basically, you have lots of things that are stored and occupying the space that you have of the hard disk, but at the same time you have difficulty in retrieving what you stored, and at the same time, because you stored a lot, you have difficulty in doing multiple functions or doing one function without the laptop freezing or something of that sort. Okay? Alright. So, if you connect this, the way you treat or you deal or you work with a computer, if it's careless, the machine, the lifetime of the machine shortens.
Same thing. If you're careless within yourself or with yourself, the lifetime of this body to handle things will also get, the abilities will diminish, will be limited, will be confined. Why? Because you're burdening and you're exhausting the body itself. And I want you to note something. I understand that I've been talking from a biological standpoint when I explain the working memory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. This is a Western framework of things. The Islamic philosophy is much different. It's much different and yet very similar as well. But because they talk as philosophers, not only because they're Muslim, but also because they're philosophers, they talk about the mind but not the brain. So the mind is different than the brain. The brain is biological. The brain is what's inside here. Alright? Al-mukh. Okay? But the mind is not a physical entity. It is an entity, but it's not a physical one. And they say it in Arabic, مُجَرَّدٌ عَنِ الْمَادَّةِ. You understand? That it's not a physical. It's not within the physical realm. But I want here to explain something. The Sheikh Shihabuddin al-Suhrawardi, he said that the relationship between the mind and the soul, or the movement between the mind and the soul, between the soul and the body. I apologize. Between the soul and the body. Okay, so you have a spirit, you have a ruh, which is a soul or a spirit, and you have the body itself. All right. So there is a movement back and forth between them, and they say this. They call this movement. They call it al-harakatu shawqiyya, the movement of love. And sometimes they would call that this movement is circular. But the example that Sheikh Shihabuddin al-Suhrawardi has talked about, or the metaphor that he used, he said that the relationship between the body and the soul is like a magnet, two magnetic poles, right? So they are attracted together. You can attract two pieces of magnet together. And there's a magnetic field or magnetic energy going back and forth between them, and has different shapes and forms. But they're very attracted to each other, and they're very connected. They're seeking each other. Okay? So these two magnets are attracted to each other. So this is the movement of attraction, or the movement of love, al-harakatu shawqiyya. So they're attracted together. And at the same time, because both of them are attracted to each other, what happens? There is energy transmission going back and forth between them, and it has different shapes and types and so on. So this is the same. What he's trying to say is that the body affects the soul. Al-jasad, the body, all right, affects the soul. يؤثر في الروح. And back. That the soul affects the body as well. It's back and forth. In different forms and shapes and types and times. You understand? Okay? So sometimes when we talk from biological standpoints, these biological standpoints are not necessarily contradictory to the standpoints of Sufism or Islamic philosophy when they talk about a-ruh or a-nafs or the soul. You understand? Actually, the Muslim philosophers have said that the abilities or the faculties or the functions of the soul have almost identical functions in the body. You understand? Like every function in the ruh or in the soul has a correlating tool, physical tool in the body. You understand? So there is an anatomy of the soul, anatomy of a ruh, a skeleton, and at the same time there is a correlation with the body itself. You get the point? Okay? Yes? Did you understand it? Go again, repeat it. Repeat it? Okay. So, we're talking about different functions in the brain, and we talked about how the brain has a working memory and a short-term memory, a long-term memory, and there are different other functions that you have in the brain. Right now, for the sake of this lecture, we're talking about the memory only. Okay? So you would find, for example, in the Islamic philosophy, in the discourse of Islamic philosophy, they talk about something called al-hissu al-mushtarak. And this is not common sense. Okay? Al-hissu al-mushtarak. So, and this means, that was a cheesy joke, right? But so you see, it's not common sense. Al-hiss, it means sense or perception in this regard. So it's the common perception or the common receptor, so to speak. Okay? And we talk about how al-hiss al-mushtarak is an area in the mind, not the brain. Okay? Or a function of the mind, not the brain. This function in particular, it gathers the information that is perceived by the senses. And it facilitates them. It's like they're gathering everything on a plate. For the remainder functions of the mind, like the rational ability, or the ability to, the memory, to do what? To gather whatever it needs from that plate. Which is very similar to the function of the working memory in the brain. It gathers information and let it be available for memorization, for thinking about it and rationalizing it and analyzing the information that you're gathering by the senses. You understand? So you have in the mind, in the mind, you have al-hiss al-mushtarak. There are similarities between al-hiss al-mushtarak, and this can be researched more in depth. There are similarities between al-hiss al-mushtarak and the working memory. You understand? Which is a brain function, a biological function. And there is a correlation, meaning they go together parallel. You understand? There is a correlation between a function in the mind, في العقل, and a function in the brain, في المخ. And the brain is physical and the mind is not physical. Okay, it's abstract. And the mind, the abstract, is using the physical. And yet, it is being affected by the physical, and it affects the physical. All of these relations, interconnections, and communication going back and forth between the body and the soul. Okay? Okay. Coming back to this topic of memory. Imam Suhrawardi has mentioned, Zarnuji, I apologize. Imam Zarnuji has talked about how reduction of eating, for example, is something that helps memory. And what he means, and I guess you can automatically outrule the idea of malnutrition. He's not saying eat less than what you need to function, because he obviously has talked about the importance of nutrition before, if you guys remember. And he actually recommended some types of food. So you cannot take this part of the text and say, see, he's saying that we should not eat. How come if you don't eat, you cannot study and you cannot learn? Well, he's saying don't overeat. What he means by reduction. Don't overeat. Or if you eat, you don't have to eat until you feel that you're full. Just eat that whatever keeps you active. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like we don't eat until we become full. Right? Okay. Or we don't eat until we're hungry, and when we eat, we don't get full. And then he recommended something he recommended an application, or something that's practical. He said, after the reduction of eating, and he said praying at night, and then he said reading and reading of the Quran are among the causes of remembering. And then he said, it is said, there is nothing that increases memory more than reading the Quran silently. And reading the Quran silently is the most excellent thing because of the word of the Prophet ﷺ, and the most excellent thing among the words of my community is reading the Quran silently. Okay. What is the relationship between reading the Quran and the silent reading of the Quran to memory? This is our question. This is what. In order to understand this, bring the framework that we have just explained from Imam Suhrawardi about the relationship between the soul and the body. Obviously, the Quran has a spiritual effect. So it will, when you read the Quran, are you using your body or your soul?
Soul.
Reading?
Reading of body. Yeah.
Body. But it affects the soul. It's both. You are right in some sense. You're using both because the physical, the self, when we define the self in Islam, what is the self? What is al-ana? The self. What is me?
Even if you're not understanding yet, can affect your soul even if you don't know it, or just the idea of...
But can you write that down? Because that's a little bit different. I just want to explain the basics of the... It's a good question though. I just want to explain the basics of the idea first. Okay, what is the self? The self is a body and soul together. Is what makes the self. Okay? Regardless which is more important than the other, or which is core and something else complementary. Put that notion aside, but the idea is that they're both of them. But reading as an action, it is physical. Not as benefits that you get, not as living the experience. The action. Action is physical. Okay? So you read the Quran silently, and reading the Quran silently, you're doing something with your perception, with your eyes, and this physical action that you're doing, using the sense of the eye, the eyesight, in turn, it affects what? The soul. Alright? And then the soul would do what? Would affect the body one more time, back again, in return. You understand? It's like a cycle. That's why I said it has this kind of circular motion. See, when you're away from prayer, and then you start praying, you don't automatically feel khushu', you don't automatically feel the piety and the tranquility of the prayer, right? But after a couple of times, you start living the prayer, right? Why? Because there's something going back and forth from the body and the soul, and the soul and body, and so on. So reading the Quran, we can say that it has positive effects on the soul. And that would in turn have positive effects on the body as well. This is one hand. On the other, what happens when you read silently? Let's first, what happens when you read anything silently? What does that require?
Memory.
Kind of. Are you asking or you're answering?
I'm answering.
Okay.
I think you just use your eye sense.
Okay.
And you transfer what you're reading to your brain.
Okay.
To just translate its effect on your information, your previous information.
So you're articulating, you're thinking about what you're reading.
Yeah, and your soul also.
And your
soul.
Your soul. Okay. But basically, what I try to focus on here is what when you read, when you do silent reading, you're using less physical action, right? You're not using your tongue. You're just moving your eyes, and that would require from you what? More concentration and more attention. right? So you're indirectly helping yourself to do what? To develop the ability of focusing and attention. And the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it, or has brought it near to those who approach it. Yes? لَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ. Alright? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy for remembrance, or remembering, or recitation. Right? وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ. Dhikr is what? Recitation. And another meaning for dhikr is what? Remembering. Remembering what? He did not say لِذِكْرِهِ. لِذِكْر. So if you say that the alif and lam in a dhikr is لِلْعَهْدِ الذِّهْنِ, so it would be لِذِكْرِ الْقُرْآن. Do you understand? وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy for remembrance. Remembering the Quran, or remembrance in general. You understand? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy to be remembered and recited, for the sake of that it is remembered and recited, or for the sake of what? Remembering and reciting in general. Exactly, and memorizing. You understand? But this particular articulation has to be revised, though.
But actually, I'm sorry for that, but while reading silently, I feel like using...
Yeah, we'll get to this. Why silently, not?
No, like if I read like silently, I just lose my concentration. I don't know why.
But that's the point. What he's asking you to work on this, to develop the habit of reading silently. That's why Ahmed Isa al-Mawlawi, in his book Fayd al-Haram, he said, when you're trying to explain something to yourself, try in the beginning to explain it without words. Not without reciting the words, without saying words in your mind. And that's almost impossible. It's very difficult. Actually, there are two opinions in the Islamic philosophy on this. Either it's very difficult, or it's impossible. That you think of something without naming it in your mind, without doing kind of a scenario or a context, or using words and names and things like that to ascribe things and attribute things to one another. Think of an idea or a concept without words. This is the first step. The second step, think of it with words. And if you can't, then think of it with words and recite them. But the best is to think of something without even describing it into your mind. But again, as I said, this is a matter of dispute. It's very difficult. I tried it. Very difficult. Because the moment you say, I'll think about this. I'll think about the camera. You just said camera. And it's always there. So what you need to do is what? Think of it as an object, not as a word.
So what should I think of that?
But this is easy when we say camera. But when you say concepts and ideas and thoughts, how do you think about them without using words to describe them? This is very difficult. And that's why some of them said impossible. But then, and the two opinions, one is ascribed to Ibn Sina and the other is ascribed to Sharif al-Jurjani. And then, when we talk about the second step is to think or to articulate or summarize or explain ideas and thoughts in your mind using words. And the third step, while reciting those words. So you find some people, when they think about things, they would talk out loud. They would talk the lesson out loud. They would talk the idea that they're thinking, the question that they're trying to answer, the problem that they're trying to solve. They would say it out loud. They would say words out loud. Okay? Okay, so what I was quoting Ahmed Isa al-Mawlawi for one reason, which is the importance of silent thinking. Thinking without uttering. Okay? Because that means the more that you're using the brain less than the physical actions, or the more you're using your mind than your body, this is more closer to attention. Okay? And you would find that the memories, or the things that you remember, are usually the things that happened when you were most attentive. See, attention is the direction of the thought. If you don't have attention, you will not memorize, because your effort is not even directed towards something. Just like the RAM in the computer, you're multitasking, you're opening a lot of applications. So you're not able to rally all the power towards one application. It's diffused, it's not concentrated. You understand? But when you focus this attention and you direct it towards something, it is grasped. And if it's grasped, then the facilitation for memory happens. But if that grasping, if that absorption is not happened, then there is no facilitation for the memory to begin with. There is nothing there to memorize. You understand? So you cannot retain information and you cannot save it unless you are attentive to what is being given. And you would not be able to be attentive unless you're able to focus. And one of the ways to focus is to do what? Is to do silent thinking or silent reading. And the best thing that you would do silent reading in is the Quran. Why? Because the Quran itself helps in remembrance, regardless if it's silent or not. So if it's silent, then you have two reasons to develop good memory. One is the silent reading, which develops the ability to focus, and the other is the barakah, the blessing of the Quran itself. He's a genius.
But this is again the concept of when you use more physical issues like your hand and your voice and so on. This is better for remembering. As we always in lectures and in other things, we always take notes. This helps us to understand more, as where you cannot express on if you can express it on paper, then mean you understand it well.
Good question. But my answer would be twofold. Number one is correlation doesn't imply causation. Meaning, if I remember when I do things physically, that doesn't mean I remember because of the physical action. It's probably I remember because I was attentive. And the way I got attentive was to write notes. This is one. The other is, we're not talking about writing notes when somebody else is talking. We're talking about reading something that is already written. You understand? So there are two different examples. This is one.
I just don't understand the last part.
When you write notes in a lecture, there's somebody talking.
Yeah.
So the way for you to be attentive, note, the way for you to be attentive to their talking is the writing.
Okay.
But the way to be attentive when reading is doing that silent way.
Yeah.
Okay, this is one. What is more available for you? Attending lectures and writing notes, or reading something that is already there, silently? Which helps you to practice more? Whatever is more available. So it would be reading. What is more available for a Muslim than anything else? It's the Quran. This is one. The other, sometimes they recommend that you use the physical abilities when you're learning, not to memorize, but to be able to understand. So here the physical effort is facilitating the understanding, not the retention. And actually, and if retention happens, it could be because of the understanding, not necessarily the physical action. You get my point?
So it's not.
But every time you try, I'm sorry, but every time you try to memorize something, and this is, you can check what the reality itself. People who practice music, people who try to memorize particular hand skills, they usually require silence when they're working, right? Even in some sports, I mean, people who play billiard, what do they do? It has to be silent, because it requires some kind of concentration. That requires concentration as well. I'm joking. It's okay. I don't know. Is it called billiard? What is that thing called?
Pool?
Pool? Okay. So you got the point.
Yeah.
So basically, in some sports, they would require the people to the crowd not to talk loudly and to wait for intervals where they cheer. But compare that. Note that usually those sports, they're chess or ping pong or tennis. You would find the crowd, they're not cheering Nadal, Nadal, Nadal all the way. Like they say, Ahli, Ahli. You understand? Why? Because there's only one Nadal playing. And he's required to concentrate the 100% time of the game. But in football or in soccer, you have 11 players. They're not all of them touching the ball at the same time. And they're not calling one player's name for the whole 90 minutes. You understand? So now I guess you can draw connections between being silent or not, or less noise for you to concentrate on something. So basically, the less noise or the less sound, the more likely you would concentrate. There is something else though in reading the Quran silently. See, when you read the Quran out loud, most likely, if you are, and note that Imam Zarnuji is writing this for Tullab al-Ilm, the seekers of knowledge, those who would come to study in religious circles. So they would be already reciting the Quran a lot. So they are used to reciting the Quran. So if he, say, recite the Quran and vocalize it and recite it loudly and don't read it silently, you do something habitual. And habits don't require a lot of working memory, actually. Yeah, because you do it automatically. You understand? So, I have to revise what I just said about that habits don't require a lot of working memory. But the notion is, what we can conclude, that habits sometimes facilitate the ability to do other things while you're doing the habit. Okay? That's why, like, when you're making yourself a cup of tea, you can talk on the phone, for example. Okay? So habits, or that when you're driving back home, you think about something else and not about the road. You understand? Habits facilitate, make life easy. Things become automatic, not manual. Okay? So if reciting the Quran out loud is habitual, is a habit for the students that used to attend these religious circles back then, they would do something against the habit. So it would require from them effort to focus. The habit is just reciting the Quran or vocalizing the Quran and reading the Quran in prayer. It's always loud, loud, loud. But when you say, now you're not reciting out of your memory, you're reading the words, but silently. That would require attention. Okay? Okay. And then he mentioned some things that that facilitate memory, but again, it's according to the medicine of their time. We're talking about 800 years ago. For example, he mentioned raisins. But raisins, I mean, grapes and raisins, they have, they're nutritions for the brain, and they have cognitive benefits, for example. And he said, as eating raisins, red ones. And the red ones, they have cognitive benefits, and they're also they're antioxidants, and that have many benefits physically and psychologically as well. Okay, and then he talks also about the importance of drinking honey, for example.
What the meaning of reasons?
Raisins, zabib. Okay, what else? And then he mentioned the phlegm and the things that diminishes memory or creates forgetfulness. And then he mentioned also the things about the soul, the sins, the sinful deeds, making mistakes or illegal actions. She's holding a cockroach. Okay. You might want to help out in this.
She needs to work with her hands. Just,
I guess she caught it. Yeah. My cousin did that once when he was a kid with a beetle, though. And he had to be convinced not to eat it. I guess he did not want me to say that story. Anyways.
well, I didn't
I
get
hope he doesn't
anything
watch
from what
this.
you say because of that.
No, I'm talking about my cousin, though. Okay. Okay, coming back. So he talked about how the things that affect the soul, like sins, worldly affairs, things that cause distractions or occupies the mind. And he said also attachments. And see, this notion of attachments brings us to the idea of thought suppression that I guess his name is Daniel Wegner talked about. And Daniel Wegner is a professor of psychology, and he did his works on thought suppression. He's probably the father of that area in psychology. Thought suppression. To suppress something. Okay. Thought suppression is what... suppression means that you're not letting something go, right? Something that wants to be free, but you suppress it, which isn't kind of in Arabic is kept.
I'm sorry, how comes the
Suppression, S-U-P-P-R-E-S-S-I-O-N. S-U-P-P-R-E-S-S-I-O-N. Suppression. You have to suppress the thought of writing suppression correctly at that moment. Okay, so Daniel Wegner is very renowned for his studies and research in this area of thought suppression. That why we keep on thinking about something that we want to avoid it. And you keep thinking to avoid it, and you keep thinking to avoid it, and you keep thinking to avoid it, and at one point, You say, you know what? I'm done with this avoidance. I'll do it. I'll protect my diet. I have to stay on the diet for now. I have to. I'll not eat that bar of chocolate. I'll not eat that cake. I'll not eat that, Willis Kitchen burger. That's a good place, to be honest. Free advertisement. I'll not eat that burger. And then what happens? All of a sudden, you know what? I'll just eat it for one time, and then I'll come back to the diet. And then you find the diet destroyed, diminished. Right? So, this is an example of what happens with thought suppression. And he used to do an experiment, and we can do it now. For about 30 seconds, that doesn't have seconds. For about 30 seconds, try not to think of a white bear. White bear. Okay? White bear. White bear. Don't think of it for the next 30 seconds. Alright? Start. Don't think of the white bear. Did it work? Who did not think of the... You did not think of the white bear. Did you think of something else?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about something else.
Okay, exactly. You did not think of the white bear. What did you think of? A pink elephant?
Red bear.
Red bear. Okay, well, I don't know if that counts. Okay, my son would have thought of gummy bears if they said white bear. But anyway, the point is, when you want to avoid something, see, you say, avoid something. So that thing is described. Okay? So you always say, I want to avoid it. Avoid what? Avoid the white bear. I should not be thinking of the white bear. I just said it. White bear. Right? So when you're concentrating on avoiding something, you think about it. Indirectly, implicitly, you're thinking about it. So you're not avoiding it after all.
So
You're saying you're avoiding it, but you're not. And indirectly, you're building up the momentum for it, but indirect way. Because you keep suppressing, you're creating pressure, and then it breaks. Yeah, exactly. So what you need to do is, instead of thinking of a white bear, think of a red bear, like he has done, or think of something else. Think of an elephant. Think of an iPhone or a tablet, or think of the camera. Think of a bottle of water. Think of anything else. Okay, think about an experience that happened for you today. Think about what's coming in the chapter. Think about the next course. Think about the question you want to ask. But when you put a goal to avoid something, and then you keep thinking about the avoidance, most likely at some point you fall into what you're trying to avoid. And here we have to talk about this idea that in modern psychonomics, economics is what? الاقتصاد. Economics is what? Is the ability to manage scarce resources, right? Psychology, the human psyche, has scarce resources as well. You understand? You have an ability, you have a finite ability of self-control. When you exceed it, you run out of gas. Or you pull a muscle, if you call the self-control as a muscle. So basically, you always have a finite, limited abilities in the psyche. You cannot multitask, for example, with the way people understand multitasking. You have a limited ability of self-control. You have a limited ability to suppress thoughts and ideas. You have attention, they describe it as a limited resource. You can find that in psychology textbooks. cognitive psychology textbooks, they describe attention as a limited resource. Okay, so these resources of the psyche, these abilities, they're scarce. And the person trained on how to manage these scarce resources, not to go into recession and depression and things of that sort. Okay? You want the economics of your psyche to be flourishing. Okay? And for you to do that, you have to understand in the beginning that you have limited resources. And because you have limited resources, you will use them wisely. You will not deplete what you have. You understand? And this happens with, as I mentioned, like something like a diet. I don't want to talk about examples regarding sins, but you can take what happens. And for some people, that kind of, breaking the diet is sinful. But anyways, you can take that example of the diet and apply it to sins, for example, or any kind of illegal, an action that's not lawful. Okay? So here Imam al-Zarnuji is talking about how attachments, because there's some kind of an attraction towards whatever you're trying to suppress. Right? You're attracted to something, and you're trying to suppress the attraction and avoid whatever you're attracted to. Okay? And here he talks how this depletes or diminishes or creates forgetfulness. And you would find at the times you are attracted to something or to someone, you would find your cognitive abilities, perhaps your attention to things is less, and therefore your memory will be less. I mean, you're college students, and perhaps when you were in high school, you had a crush or something. Of course, I guess the Azharis won't have that. Okay? But this is reality, folks. Don't be shy away from it. This is reality. So you find a student, a male student who has a crush on a female student. What happens? At that point in time, they don't study. They don't really focus on what's being said. Always mind wandering, thinking about dating and what would happen and all the fantasies. And then all of a sudden wake up with an F on a test or something. Right? Waking at an F, that alarm clock. So that's the notion, that when there's some kind of attachment or an attractment towards something, your ability to focus and be attentive at other details becomes less, because it occupies your mind. Okay? And in this regard, that's why marriage would kind of free your mind, at least from that attachment. But it would occupy your mind on other things. Yeah. Yes. That's another reason to deplete your limited resources. The financial ones.
It is recorded.
Oh, I know. I take full responsibility. Thank you for the heads up. It's not really heads up, it's too late. Okay. He ends this chapter, or before the very end of this chapter, he talks about what? He talks about, he says, on page 68, before the poetic verses, he says, the acquisition of learning drives out concern. Yes, actually before that, before the sentence that starts the acquisition of learning, you'll find three lines up. Care for worldly affairs impedes one from doing good, while concern for the future life, meaning the afterlife, the day of judgment, gives one impetus or impetus to do good, as does occupying oneself with prayer in a spirit of humility. But see this, care for worldly affairs impedes one from doing good. Right? This statement, that you're always thinking about the worldly affairs, always thinking about where do I get money from, what to do, how to handle my life issues, I have problems, I need to get married, I need to do that, I need to finish college. You always, the too much thinking about the worldly matters. What happens? He says that would not be helpful in memory. See what he's saying? He's saying care for all the worldly affairs impedes one from doing good. Right? And not doing good, then you would do maybe sins, or you'll not be able to be having the energy and power to do good things. And in turn, that would diminish or create forgetfulness, and on one hand, not being able to focus. If you find a student or a learner who's not able to support himself, or not able to support his learning journey, or not able to take the courses that he needs, or always being occupied with problems or limited resources, or on the other hand, occupied with things that are not pertaining learning, but going through a love story, as we were talking earlier, what happens? Either you would not be able to focus on what's needed, or you would do something that is haram. In both cases, that creates forgetfulness. And on the other hand, he's creating a transition, because the chapter afterwards, he's talking about what brings rizq, what brings allowance or sustenance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's kind of chunking. Also, he's facilitating, he's connecting both ideas together and doing that transition. He's mentioning something that on one hand would create forgetfulness, and he's talking about memory, and on the other hand, he is transitioning and creating a transition for the next topic, which is talking about rizq or sustenance coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You understand? And the importance of this towards financing your life and financing your learning journey is important for the learner. But he brings it from the point of rizq or sustenance or blessings, which is a little bit different than the notion that he mentioned earlier about the necessity of working and having a source of income to be able to sustain yourself as a learner or as an academic. You want to ask something?
Yeah, I don't understand the difference between the worldly solicitudes of necessity create darkness in the heart, but concern over the future life of necessity brings light into the heart. It is 2 lines above the lines that you were reading. I don't understand the difference between this and this. This creates darkness, this creates light.
The key notion is worldly and future life. These are the key notions. That what he's saying is, if you are too much into the dunya, into this current world, and at the same time you're not thinking about al-akhirah, about the future life, then that would create, one would create the light in the heart, and the other would create the darkness in the heart. Okay. Chapter 13. Okay, in chapter 13 he talks about which things that bring and things that prevent earning a livelihood, and which things augment, meaning it makes something bigger or expand or diminish the years of one's life. He's ending this book on a spiritual note. On one hand, he is connecting memory to creating memory and diminishing forgetfulness. On one hand, he's creating a relationship between that and the idea of blessings and livelihood in general. This is one. The other, as I said earlier, he's ending the book on a spiritual note, and this is something important. The third, he's drawing a relationship between the idea of blessing and knowledge. See, knowledge is some kind of a risk, some kind of an earning that we get from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's drawing a link on that as well. What else? Actually, everything that was mentioned in that book, from the very beginning until the end, is subject to the notion of risk. You cannot develop skills of learning. You cannot develop, or you cannot get or earn knowledge out of these practiced skills or abilities or techniques unless there is risk from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the spiritual note here is, whatever you have done, whatever you were doing so far, you would not be able to reap the fruit of that. You will not get the benefit of it unless you will not earn it without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the spiritual note that he's ending with. And also the note that I have mentioned earlier, the idea of financing or having a source of income, and how that helps free your mind from problems and free your mind from burdens to take care of. Because he starts this chapter saying it is essential for the student of learning that he have sustenance and knowledge of those things which increase it, as well as the duration of life and health, in order to be free from all other occupations, so as to devote his time to the pursuit of knowledge only. Okay? So he's talking about health, duration of life, what brings good health and extends the duration of life. So when you find notions now in the West talking how to live longer, that's not new. Okay, 800 years ago, Imam al-Zawji talking about lifelong learning and ending on the note of how to live longer. So it's too bad for the people of, talk about human development and personal development. It's not new. The concern is not new, but maybe the techniques are different, of course. Just to give them, credit for whatever they say. Okay. What he has talked about in this chapter are two things. One, etiquette. And etiquette is also two things. Things that you should avoid, certain practices and behaviors that in his time were found to be reasons of blocking risk from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or earning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sustenance. So etiquettes that block earning, and etiquettes that facilitate or would develop the earning, or augment the earning or the livelihood. Etiquette. And the other is basically spiritual remembrance that you would say, the dhikr, or prayers that you would say that bring back sustenance and earning and blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the skeleton or the main points of this chapter. Okay? You would find the things that he has talked about that block the risk. Some of them, the etiquettes that he talked about, some of them are, it might be difficult for us to take one by one and draw links to concepts, to modern day concepts. Some of them are utterly or merely based on their current culture. And others, they could be relevant to today's world. But if you guys remember what I mentioned last time, that in the Muslim tradition, the scholars sometimes, you would mention concepts in an explicit way, and sometimes you would mention applications or examples, and they leave out the concept for you to infer from the text. And I guess some of the examples that he has mentioned, he's leaving that out for us to infer. Like, for example, he says, leaving spider webs in the house. And how that blocks risk. You can say, leaving spider webs in the house. You're not cleaning the house. The house is not clean. House is not clean, low hygiene, people get sick, infections. At the same time, it would not be, maybe somebody's not cleaning the house, is not organized. You can say something along these lines. There's a relationship between being clean and earning blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he wanted, instead of saying that, he gave you an example to think. You understand? Instead of saying, be clean, he would say, don't leave spider webs in the house. So that would get you thinking. How would that block my risk? And then you start thinking, he's saying, spider, so if I leave ant nests, that's okay? Of course not. You get the point. And maybe there's a relationship between spiders in particular. That's another spiritual notion. You understand? But the point that we can infer from, or the angle that we can infer something from this text that refers to our modern day is what? Is that cleaning the house, for example.
Actually, my mother used to say this, and I never thought of it like
Really?
this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something in spiders.
I don't know.
Spider webs are also in the fiqh is najasa. Because the spider makes the web itself not from its mouth. It's from its rear end. Okay? So the ulama, they would say that it's the spider web is najis. So on one hand, you're not cleaning the house, and on the other hand, you're leaving najasa around. And then if you leave najasa around and then you come and pray, that will block the spiritual. Maybe that's the reason of the spiritual reason behind it. Okay. You can double check the biology. Yeah. You can double check. I'm pretty sure that the spiders they make the webs not from the mouth, as people think. There are things that are very direct and to the point. Neglecting prayers, for example. See, he says to be very early in going to the market and to be late in returning from it, which means what? Spending too much time. See, what he's trying to do is creating, a context that gets you thinking about what he's saying. Okay, so he's saying spending too much time in the market would block the blessings. How would that block blessings or reduce blessings or diminish blessings? Because the market people do what? Interact. And there are many things that go. It's people shouting, people bargaining. There's a great involvement between men and women, and that might be a reason for things. There are different types of sins that go on in a market. And the reason is because it's very worldly. It's buying and selling, it's consumption. So that's why. It's spending too much time in that atmosphere. And that, of course, maybe the women or the girls would not like what we're saying. It's like, don't shop too much to get more risk. Okay. So if you stop shopping, you can develop a learning lifestyle.
This is for us, right?
Now I'm just talking. I'm just saying. I didn't know you shop too much. Who knows? But I guess indirectly you have said so.
Actually, it's boring.
Okay.
But girls are famous in that.
Okay, and then he mentions after this part, he talks about the prayers that he would that he's recommending for a student of knowledge or for a learner to mention. This is again, it's very spiritual here because he prescribes like a whole list of things to be said. He begins with mentioning the surahs from the Quran that to be read and the verses, and then he moves on after that into the things to recite every day, and he actually ascribes certain timings for everything to be said. Like he would say this at the day break of the time and say this 100 times, for example. So he's ascribing the quantity and the quality and the time of what to be said, of the remembrance. And that, of course, some of you might take this as a recipe or as a prescription, and they would follow it. And others would say, I follow my sheikh in this, or I follow the traditional remembrance that has been narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. There is siyah, there is room for different opinions and different selections of prayers and remembrance. He ends the last thing that I would mention about this chapter, which I think is important. He said in the end, and it is necessary that one learns something of medicine. And this is explicit. He's mentioning how note this, that 800 years ago, a Muslim jurist, in the very end, in the last paragraph of his book about the techniques of learning, was primarily written for students of Islamic Sharia. He's saying to them what? And it is necessary that one learns something of medicine. So the students here from Al-Azhar University that study Sharia, do you study medicine with Sharia? I guess the people who are putting the curriculum are not following Imam al-Zarnuji. It's not me. I'm not the one making the recommendation, it's him. Right? It's saying that al-faqih, the person who's studying fiqh, is required to study medicine.
But what is the relationship?
That's a good question. What is the relationship? Actually, it's two. There are two things. One of them, if you guys remember, that they always draw a connection between medicine and fiqh. In the metaphor about the importance of fiqh or the importance of knowledge, they use medicine and they use health. Because they go hand in hand. The medicine, it cures the physical part of the self, and the fiqh is in particular, or the Sharia in general, is correcting what? Is curing the soul. But fiqh in particular, because medicine heals the physical body. And the physical body is what is through which the action of fiqh happens. Fiqh is dealing with what? The actions, not the heart. It's dealing with the actions, right or wrong. You understand? So the faqih has to understand some knowledge about medicine, for not to become a doctor, but to understand, perhaps, to have an understanding about some of the physical implications of his fatwa. Or if his fatwa would be built on physical, knowledge of medicine. See? But nowadays, instead of having fuqaha developing an understanding of medicine, they would leave that out from the curriculum and say, when we have a conference, we'll bring doctors to make presentations. I bet you don't understand anything from the presentations. So because here he's not asking the faqih to become a doctor. He's asking the faqih to have a background in medicine, but not to become a doctor. So after all, you will not make the recommendations. After all, you're not issuing a verdict in medicine. After all, you're not ascribing an opinion, or declaring a right or wrong. You're just having a background to understand. And then what is really interesting, that he said after that, and it is necessary that one learn something of medicine and obtain the blessings of traditions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam handed down to us concerning medicine. See, he did not say study the tradition of the Prophet in medicine. Note, he said this, he said, and obtain the blessings of the tradition. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Ibn Khaldun explicitly mentions in the Muqaddimah, he said the Prophet ﷺ, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has not sent messengers as doctors or engineers. They're messengers, they're not doctors. So part of the actions of the Prophet ﷺ in medicine, part of it is that he was an Arab. Not because he was a prophet, he was an Arab. But at the same time, because Arabs had a prophet, so the blessings from him towards their actions happened. You understand? It's not because their tradition in medicine was good, in particular. Maybe good, maybe bad. But because the Prophet ﷺ is a messenger, and he has conducted some of the recommendations of his Arab culture, these things became blissful. Understand? So, what is being marketed now, or has been recently marketed in Egypt as At-Tibb al-Nabawi, or the prophetic medicine. And people make clinics and getting money from people on this. This is bogus. This is pseudoscience. Because here Imam al-Zarnuji has said what? He has said, take this and obtain the blessings. He did not say study it. Obtain the blessings meaning what? Meaning eat 7 days in the morning. You understand? Eat 7 days on an empty stomach. Things of that nature. But you find other people doing what? Say, don't take medicine. Apologize. It's done. Say, don't take medicine. Leave out medicine. Leave out pharmaceutical solutions. Leave out therapies. Put aside all the 7 years of medicine or 8 years of study and the 2 other 4 masters and the 2 more, making it 12 years of study. Put all of that aside and eat dates only. Put all that aside and use, I don't know, whatever oil. Put that aside and eat in that certain way. Imam al-Zarnuji is saying what? Study medicine. See, it was very clear that one learned something of medicine, and he separated learning medicine as a discourse, as a discipline, from obtaining the blessings of the Prophet. That's another issue.
Learn something of medicine, not learn this.
Yeah, exactly. Again, he said learn something of medicine. Yes, develop that background in medicine. But at the same time, when you go to the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ medicine, don't treat it as the science of medicine. Deal with it as what? The tradition of the Prophet. You understand? So, let's imagine that someone has problems if they eat dates. Like it has, imagine, it has some kind of, implications or, ramifications on the physical health. Would we recommend then eat dates? No, don't eat them. If you have some kind of allergy out of dates, we would force people to eat dates because the Prophet ﷺ used to eat dates. And then, we recommend it in general, of course. We find that following it, there is a blessing in following the Prophet ﷺ, and that, of course, we find that. But you have to separate where tradition stops and medicine takes through, or where medicine stops and tradition takes through. You understand? And he made that implicitly, but you can infer it from the separation in the text. And Imam Ibn Khaldun, as I mentioned in the Muqaddimah, has talked explicitly, and he was very direct about how messengers are not doctors. They were not sent with books of medicine and how to conduct surgery and the different organs and the functions of the organs and the systems. You understand? And the Prophet ﷺ, when he gave a recommendation about planting and it did not work, he said, "Antum a'lam bi shu'uni dunyakum." The things that of the worldly matters, you know it more. You understand? He was sent as a messenger, not as a scientist. And by knowing this, and actually by protecting this understanding, you're helping science and you're helping religion. Otherwise, if religion takes something out of science, then contradictions happen. Or if science try to take something from religion, where hostility become. Okay? And by doing this, we get to the very, very last sentence where he said, "May the blessing of God rest on our Lord Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the seal of the noble envoys, and on his kin and his companions, the outstanding leaders of the community forever and ever. Ameen." So, alhamdulillah. Okay. I guess there was something about the ideas to do next time. About the following or the coming in the future. I guess we can leave it for next time, for the time where we do the celebration, I guess. What do you guys think? And then we can just make a dua now, and then we finish. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, if you have any questions about today's...
It is not about today's.
Okay.
It's in general. Do you think that there are some set of basic disciplines or basic science that you should know in order for your brain and your mind to operate in a perfect way? Like, for instance, that there are some set of prerequisites for all the sciences and all the things that you should know.
Okay, good question. Mustafa is asking, are there core sciences where things branch off from? If there is a core science, it would be philosophy, out of which everything else branched from. And philosophy, there's a philosophy of childhood. That's a good book.